Mr. Goble. First of all, thank you very much for your time. I contacted you last week, but today we finally had the opportunity to broadcast this video. Most likely, most of the viewers, especially political researchers, know you in our country, actually. Your research, articles, and studies make us say this. So, as a social research center, we host Western politicians and political scientists on our social media accounts weekly and ask them questions in their fields. So to briefly introduce you to our viewers, our guest today is Mr. Paul Goble, former advisor to the CIA and US State Department. If you're ready, we can start the questions.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Okay. The first question will be about Karabakh issue, and which has been one of the main agenda items lately. As you know, Azerbaijan has now completely resolved the Karabakh problem in order to clear the region from illegal military organizations. And President Aliyev also voiced this idea already at the end of the first war in 2020. He said that Azerbaijan no longer has a land problem. So now let's come to the next issue. It's about the Zengezur corridor issue. How do you evaluate the possibility of opening this corridor?
Well, I think it's very unfortunate that the suppression of the illegal Armenian units, military units in Karabakh did not lead to a decision by the ethnic Armenians there to accept what President Aliyev said, namely that Azerbaijan would secure their rights. I think the flight of Armenians from Karabakh to Armenia proper and elsewhere is a vote of no confidence at a minimum, but it certainly, in the eyes of many around the world, will give Azerbaijan and to a lesser extent Turkey a black eye. I think that President Aliyev was quite right in 2020 in stopping the Azerbaijani advance before provoking that kind of a outflow. And I'm very sorry that it happened now. I think there would have been many reasons to believe that a prosperous, happy, integrated ethnic Armenian community within Azerbaijan would have served Baku's purposes, and that the creation of a almost ethnically homogeneous Azerbaijan, while it may make it easier to run the country, will have the effect of making it more difficult to deal with some of the relations across the border. That's your first question. Your second question about Zengezur. I've been interested in the Zengezur corridor for more than 30 years, and I understand very well that Stalin drew the borders in the South Caucasus to guarantee hostility between Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and that would allow Moscow to have an easier time of it, of playing divide and rule. On the one hand, you had Karabakh, which was an Armenian populated area, but inside of Azerbaijan and recognized as part of Azerbaijan. On the other, you had a Nakhchivan autonomy, which was separated from Azerbaijan proper, and the only land bridge within the then Soviet Union was to go through what the Armenians refer to as the Syunik Oblast. It had always seemed to me that a solution to the Armenian-Azerbaijani dispute would have to involve something where those two issues were addressed. Clearly, we're now at a time when Karabakh is being rapidly reintegrated. My own guess is that within the next few weeks, it will almost be entirely Armenian-free, if you will, and that the Azerbaijani population will be moved in. The speaker of the Azerbaijani parliament said that over the next 3 years, Baku plans to move in 30,000 Azerbaijani families who had been forced out in the early 90s. assuming the average family size is 5, and assuming that all of them actually go, what that will mean will be a
More than
complete
100,000, yeah.
I'm sorry, it will be
Yeah,
it would be
by
more
this
than
calculation,
102.
yeah, it would be more than 100,000
Right.
by
So
this
you're
calculation,
talking
yeah,
about a complete replacement of populations.
exactly so.
The issue of what to do about Zengezur, what to do about the corridor, is something that, not surprisingly, now that the Karabakh issue appears to have been resolved in the way that it has, some in both Azerbaijan and Turkey are talking very much about it. It was the subject of a September 25th meeting of the presidents of Turkey and Azerbaijan
Yes.
in Nakhchivan itself. My own sense at that time, the Turkish president suggested that if Armenia wasn't willing to open a corridor that Azerbaijan could use, that perhaps Iran would be willing to.
Yes.
I find it difficult to imagine Azerbaijan or Turkey having much confidence in a corridor that passed through Iran,
Yeah.
given the tensions that exist between Baku and Ankara on the one hand and Tehran on the other. I had hoped that the end of the 44-day fighting in 2020, which resulted not in an agreement, but in a declaration, that there would be moves to open at some kind of transit arrangement across Zengezur, so that Azerbaijan would feel that it had better contact with Nakhchivan than it does presently. The problem is that now we've had another outbreak of fighting. We've had the expulsion, to put it in one term, of ethnic Armenians from Karabakh. And we've seen that in the world after Vladimir Putin launched his expanded invasion of Ukraine, more countries are willing to think about the use of force to achieve their ends. I very much hope that doesn't happen. I very much hope that some kind of corridor can be agreed to. I think the prospects for that are now less than they were before the Armenian population left Karabakh.
Yes.
I think now there will be more pressure on Aliyev, President Aliyev, and others, and there'll be more interest in supporting that from Turkey in some kind of a quote complete solution to the issue, and that probably would involve a military move. I don't think the Russians would counter with a military move of their own for all kinds of reasons, but I do think that what that would do is, in effect, it would create a new frozen conflict in the South Caucasus. In other words, instead of what's happened in Hankandi and Karabakh in the last few weeks being the beginning of the end, or beginning of a move toward cooperation, that would be the occasion for new tensions. I think it would be very difficult at that point to get the so-called Russian peacekeeping contingent to pull out of Azerbaijan
now
territory.
We have, there are some kind of rumors, not yet in any information that has been said by the governments, but the Russian peacekeepers are leaving the region, they say.
Well, they shouldn't be called they shouldn't be called peacekeepers because they don't qualify under international law.
Yes, of course, but
peacekeepers have to be from neutral third countries, and the fact is the Russians have a military base on one of the sides, and they have real tensions with the other. But the question is, do the Russian forces leave? My sense is that Baku has no choice but to demand that they leave, given that the basis for their presence is no longer there. I think it would be in Azerbaijan's interest to make sure that happens first before anything is done with regard to Zengezur, because if something is done in Zengezur and there are still Russian forces in the western part of Azerbaijan, I think it would be very unlikely that Mr. Putin would be willing to withdraw all of them.
I would also like to ask you about that. Like, it seems that relations between Armenia and Russia are quite tense at the moment. How long do you think this situation will last?
Well, it should surprise no one that the Russian government is not happy about the fact that Armenia has shown that it no longer has confidence in what Russia says, that it wants to build much closer ties, especially with Europe and the French, but also with the United States, and that it has taken a number of steps, including most recently, I think yesterday, acceding to the International Criminal Court arrangement, so that if Mr. Putin were ever to show up in Armenia, he would be arrested and sent to The Hague.
That was interesting. Yes.
Moscow sees that, not surprisingly, as an unfriendly act. Some years ago, a very wise Azerbaijani commentator observed that in the South Caucasus, it's always the case that Georgia is the tool, Armenia is the way, and Azerbaijan is the prize. The Russians hope to pick up the pieces so casting Armenia aside is a certain sense of, we are close to getting what we want, which is a renewed Russian role in Baku.
Yeah.
I think in the short term, Moscow really thinks it can create enough tension, enough instability in Armenia by playing up not only the Armenians coming back from Karabakh and their political leaders, rebuilding, if you will, the Karabakh lobby in Armenia, and using that to bring down the Pashinyan regime. Armenia does not have a perfect track record of stable democracy over the last 30 years. And so I think the Russians believe that they possibly can change things. At the same time, I think much of what we're hearing about Armenia in Moscow reflects a turning point, that Moscow believes that it really has more to gain by being friendly with Azerbaijan than it does with Armenia. Armenia was always a tool. It was never a goal. And the Russians managed to convince themselves that the Armenians had nowhere to go. Well, the Armenians may not have any good place to go, but they now have support in Paris in particular that matters more than perhaps Moscow thinks. So short term, I think Moscow will try to overthrow Pashinyan, maybe violently. Longer term, I think that Russia is going to be moving away from Armenia unless Azerbaijan takes any steps that Russia feels are so unfriendly that Moscow has to go back to forming some kind of closer ties with Armenia in order to be able to put pressure on Azerbaijan. This is a multi-level game. This is chess played at 3 or 4 levels. And so one should never assume that what one sees on one level is necessarily going to be what will happen in the game as a whole.
Interesting. And then also my next question will be like, mostly wars happen because of the need of peace. So as of now, one of the most painful and without question tragic conflicts from 90s ended, and Azerbaijan now has full control on its own soil. I would like to ask you that, do you see the chance of peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia in the next years?
Well, I mean, first off, I don't think the conflict has ended. I think Azerbaijan has gotten a great deal of what it wants. That is to say, it has restored sovereign control over everything up to the 1991 borders. I think that's That's a major achievement for Azerbaijan. Having said that, I would suggest that the pictures of Armenians fleeing Stepanakert or
Yes,
Hakkandi
Kankendi, yeah.
is sparking feelings around the world of suspiciousness, if not more, not open hostility, in many places that Azerbaijan didn't need. I think that an approach such as we saw in 2020, where Azerbaijan laid the stress on disarmament is required, but we plan to make sure that every resident in this region feels a full-blooded citizen of Azerbaijan. I think that was a better route forward. Having said that, I understand, especially in the wake of Vladimir Putin's aggression in Ukraine, the desire of many people to quote, solve, unquote, a problem that's been with us for 3 or 4 decades. As far as a peace settlement, and I would make, I guess, 3 comments. First, I don't expect a single agreement to constitute a peace settlement. In other words, I don't think we're going to see a day when the prime minister of Armenia and the president of Azerbaijan sign a single document and that will be called peace between our 2 countries. I think what you're going to see is a whole variety of agreements, some on big issues, some on smaller issues. There are a lot of complicated things that have to be sorted out, one of which, of course, is Zengezur. Some of those agreements, I think, could be reached in the next few months. I think they're now probably have been delayed because the Armenians feel that they have been betrayed by too many people. The Russians didn't help them. So what are they bringing to the table? And I think the Armenians will try in the coming months to play up their links to Paris and the West generally as a way of having greater weight when the talks are in fact held. I believe that Azerbaijan being in the stronger position, which, to be blunt, we all knew was coming and was going to happen. I've been writing about this since the late 80s, and I can tell you it was pretty clear to everyone from the day Azerbaijan and Armenia gained their independence that eventually Azerbaijan would have the power, would have the military strength to do what it wanted to do in the South Caucasus.
It was inevitable.
But you don't always gain your broader goals by using military force.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, Russia is certainly in a weaker position today than it was before Vladimir Putin expanded his invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. I think there is a risk if Azerbaijan doesn't take some dramatic moves. I mean, maybe I don't know exactly what they are, but I think that I had hoped before the meeting was canceled that the Spanish meeting that was supposed to happen would have led Azerbaijan to extend this much of an olive branch, namely full restoration of diplomatic relations. I think that would have been a very good step. I think it would have worked for Azerbaijan's benefit. I think when you're in a position of overwhelming military force or power, it's sometimes useful to imagine how much more you can gain if you show yourself to be generous than if you show yourself not to be. I think that moving forward, the issue of what a corridor looks like between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan, if Azerbaijan is showing itself to be generous in these cases, then I think there's a very real possibility for something like what people hoped for after the tripartite declaration in 2022. If that doesn't happen, then I think it's increasingly likely that someone will want to use military force. and that then you're talking about a situation where, yes, there's a corridor. It's controlled by Azerbaijan. It's no longer part of Armenia. Does anyone really believe that won't have consequences in world capitals, starting with Moscow, but also in Tehran, also in Paris, also in Washington? So my own advice, if I were ever asked for it, would be this is the time for Azerbaijan to be generous, to show itself a peacemaker, and to say, we really meant what we said about protecting the rights and freedoms of ethnic Armenians. We're sorry that so many of them didn't believe it. We want to cooperate with Armenia. We want transit to go through there. And we want an agreement on a corridor. And to that end, we want to open full diplomatic relations. If that were to be done, then I think there's a lot more room for moving toward more agreements. But if it isn't, then I think we have to face the facts that there will be lots of people in Baku and in Ankara who will say this was a Soviet crime against the Azerbaijani people and the Turkic peoples, and therefore it should be resolved. And in a world where the use of state violence is no longer anathema in the way it was before February 2022, I think those people will unfortunately be listened to, and the results could be very bad.
My last question will be, there is a general belief among Western political scientists that Russia has lost its dominance in Eastern Europe with the prolongation of the Ukrainian war. Personally, some of the people I interviewed also said that. And what do you think about it? Do Russia really lost its dominance?
I think I think Vladimir Putin has adopted a strategy of a bridge too far. And I think he has weakened Russia across the board, at home and abroad. I think he has, it says a whole lot when the world leaders that Vladimir Putin is talking to head countries like North Korea and small African states that most people couldn't find on a map. This is no longer, he has lost support in every region of the world. He is weaker, Russia is weaker, and it will take Russia decades to recover from this. Tragically, many people inside Russia do not yet recognize fully just how much what Putin has done has weakened not only him, but their country. And it's not just about sanctions, it's about an attitude. I think the hostility to Russians qua Russians is greater now across the world than it was even during the coldest days of the Cold War. I think that certainly after the death of Stalin, we've seen nothing like the kind of hostility toward Moscow in country after country, not just those who've had the unfortunate experience of living with Russian occupation, like the Balts or the Ukrainians, but all across the world. And again, just as it takes decades to win trust, but you can lose it in a moment, I would say that the progress that Russia had made in the 90s in the direction of becoming more part of the international concert of nations, Vladimir Putin has done what he can to destroy that possibility going forward. And recovering that is going to be very, very hard.
Thank you so much, Mr. Goble, for your time. It was an amazing interview.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Take care.